Okay, I'm going to start working you through the toolbar and some of our options we have within our panels here. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and loaded in a sunrise image that's available in the content folder of this CD-ROM, or if you downloaded it, it'll be in the content folder. And I just have this, actually it's a 8 megapixel image, so if we go ahead and zoom in, you can see that we can get in there pretty far. And because of the low lighting, it's actually a little pixelated in here, and the fact that it was saved as a JPEG also causes a lot of that pixelation and graininess. But for the sake of the tutorial, I'm just going to go ahead and size this down. So let's say this is a lot larger than we need to be working with. We want to scale it down. One easy thing we can do is just go to right mouse click on the top here, this top bar, go to image size, and we are going to change our image size and by a percentage. So we can select from pixels to percent, and I'm going to change the width from 100 to 50, which is automatically going to update our height because we have constrained proportions on. If I turn constrained proportions off, what actually is going to happen is it's going to skew the image, and I can set this to 100 and then 50, which will squash out the image. But I want to keep constrained proportions on so we can keep that the same. And I'm going to change that and click OK. And this will cut our image in half. So now it's going to be a little bit easier working with. It's a lot smaller than it was before. And at this size, too, we really can't see a lot of those distortions caused by the low light of the image. Okay, the first thing we're going to take a look at is our selection. And this is our rectangular marquee selection. If we actually click on it and hold down with the left mouse button, you'll see that we have lots of different options. We can select a rectangular marquee, an elliptical marquee, a single row, or a single column. Let's go ahead and take a look at our rectangular marquee. We can just go ahead and select the square, and then we can even just move the square around without actually editing the image while we're still using the marquee tool. Before I can really edit anything in the image, though, I'm going to have to get rid of this locked background layer. Because this is the only layer and it's just an image by itself, it hasn't been edited in Photoshop before, it's a JPEG, this background layer is locked. In other words, I can't edit it. And if I do edit it, what's going to happen is instead of showing transparency underneath, if I move this or delete an area, it's going to show whatever the background color is. So if I go ahead and move this, we have a white area in the back, and this is not on a separate layer. So that is going to reflect, and it's going to be hard to go back if we need to change anything. So I'm going to undo that by hitting Control-Z, deselect, or we could even go up into our history over here and just go back before we did the rectangular marquee, right mouse click and hit delete. So we can go back and use our history that way. But I'm going to double click on this background layer down here, and now it's going to ask me to create a new layer. That's because the bottom layer is always the background layer, and that is locked. And now we are pretty much unlocking it and creating a new layer. So I'm just going to keep this at the default layer 0 because I'm not going to be working with many layers, and click OK. We also have the ability to change the color, which will reflect in the bars here in the layer panel, and I'll show you that in just a sec once we have a couple more layers in there. So click OK. There's another setting we can also do to change our layers here, and as you can see, since we have such a small layer panel, I'm used to having this stretched out all the way and out a little bit farther, so I have very large thumbnails. We can right mouse click in this gray area where there's no layers and actually change the size of our thumbnail or select no thumbnail at all. So I'm going to bring this to our medium thumbnail so we can see a decent sized layer. And now I'm going to go ahead and actually use that rectangular marquee tool again, and this time I can move it, and we're still on the same layer, and that's going to happen, but we still have this transparency behind, so we don't need to worry about deleting the white or whatever background color is in there. But if I wanted to put this on another layer, I can hit Control X to cut and Control V to paste, or we could also go up to Edit, Cut, Edit, Paste, or even copy it. And now we have a separate layer that we can see, layer 1 and layer 0, and we have the cutout that we just made by using the rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to go ahead and go back and delete that state, that history state, and I'm going to hold down the left mouse button and go to the elliptical marquee tool. And now I can select a circular selection, and I could either cut and paste that, or I could just move that around if I wanted to. So this is a good way to select certain parts of images. and really depending on what you're working on, uh, you can delete certain edges off of things, and it comes a lot in handy. Obviously, our next one was the move tool that we were using to move around those layers. So if I go ahead and redo that, cut and paste, we can use our move tool to move around this layer. Now, holding down on the move tool will not bring up any other type of move. The move tool is strictly the move tool, but with the move tool, we can also do other types of editing. With a right mouse click, we can select other layers, select similar layer, and now we have both these layers selected. So with the move tool, there's not too much we can really do except really select our layers, and as you can see, it automatically detects when I'm right mouse clicking whether I want to select layer 0 or layer 1, depending on where it's located when I right mouse click. If I'm in this transparency area and I right mouse click, I'm not going to get anything. So let's go back to our selection tool. With our selection tool, we have a bunch of other options. If we right mouse click, we can go to free transform, which will allow us to stretch out our image, really pull it out. Right mouse click again, we can select scale, we could rotate it, we could do skew, which is going to give us a different option for editing. And right mouse click again, we can go to distort, which will allow us to actually move out our corners and completely adjust this image. We can also do perspective, which is a really neat technique if you're trying to stick with a certain perspective of an image. And then we can do warp, which actually warps our image on sort of a 3D map and allows us to kind of change that around how we want it. We could also rotate our image. I'm going to hit enter really quick, just move that down. But we can flip our image if we wanted to. I'm going to go back to free transform. We can flip it horizontally, flip it vertically, and then of course our different rotations that can also be done. So there's a lot you can do with the rectangular marquee tool or any of these marquee tools for editing any sort of image. And like I said, I can go back in our history states and even delete that. So now we're back on one layer and we don't have any of those edits left. But if I wanted to, I'm going to go ahead and undo just to show you something. Go all the way back down, and I'm going to click and create a snapshot. So now we have that snapshot of that area we're at, but I'm going to go back in our history states and still delete that. So now we can start editing and working on something else if we want to go back, but we still have that snapshot in there if we want to go back to that image state, which is still our separate layers and all the additions that we made to the object. So it's kind of a neat little thing in there. You can create as many snapshots as you want. Of course, it does use a lot of RAM depending on how many you have. Our next tool is the Lasso Tool, and we also have if we hold down with the left mouse button, we also get the Polygon Lasso Tool and the Magnetic Lasso Tool. Let's take a look at just the first Lasso Tool really quick. We're going to left mouse click, and we can just drag around and draw out a selection area. So we can make this whatever shape we want, and then of course cut it like we did before, paste it, or manipulate it however you want. So that's just kind of another selection tool. We also have our Polygon Lasso Tool, which will allow us to just click with our left mouse button and draw out a polygon of straight lines so that we can use that as a selection. Then all we got to do is double click and it will select that area, which we can then edit and cut out if we wanted to. I'm going to deselect that, and now we're going to go to the Magnetic Lasso Tool, which is a pretty neat tool because what it actually does is conforms to sort of harsh ridges and allows us to select areas that way. So I'm just going to move this tool along, and you can see it's selecting this brighter area along the side, and it's pretty much just sticking to that image. And of course, with this specific image, it's a little difficult to tell exactly how accurate this can be because, of course, it's moving along. I'm just going to double click on that really quick. But if we had a really sharp edge on an image, we'd be able to see that it would just line up exactly. What you can also do is click to create control points while you're working on that. And I'm going to click on the rectangular marquee just to right mouse click and select deselect. But with the magnetic tool, it will go along very sharp creases and even not so sharp creases to get a certain effect. And we can also change how much the contrast, the frequency, the width, and the feather I'll get into feather in just a little bit. But that just shows how much control you have over the snapping to that sort of lines and contours that we want. Let's take a look at just that top feather bit we have right here. And I'm going to go ahead and set this feather to 75. And now create this rectangular marquee. Or actually our elliptical marquee. And I'm going to cut this. And as you can see, now we have this fade. And what this fade actually is 75 pixels of fade round from the center out, pretty much. So it's 75 pixels out all the way around in the circle. And that allows us to basically just feather our edges and get a nice smooth look. And if I go ahead and paste in the other one here, we can see that it cut it out and it made very soft edges. So we can change that feather as we want. We can also feather it with a free transform. I'm going to go back to our earlier state here. And what we can do is create another selection. And if we want feather actually set to 0, and we have that as their default, we can still right mouse click, select feather, and then type in an amount, and it will do that automatically. So that's something else you have with your selection tools. Another one of our selection tools, because there's many, is our magic wand tool. And actually, if we go ahead and click on that, you'll see that that is also a non-expandable tool. It's just by itself. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. And what the magic wand tool will do is select areas that we can click in, that it can see sharp changes in the color and the contrast, and really pick out certain parts of an image. So if I just want to select this white area, I can go ahead and just click on there with the magic wand and it'll automatically select it, which is really neat. And then we can adjust our tolerance. If I set a tolerance to 15, select over here and select that again, you can see it looks different. Set the tolerance to 0, and it's only going to select what's really, really white. So the higher the tolerance, the more it will select that's similar. So now we have a larger blend really going out to the yellow, and we can just adjust that tolerance. We can also adjust our anti-aliasing, whether we want it on or off. In other words, are the pixels blending, or is it going to be a very sharp edge? And then we also have a few other settings up here, which we'll get into a little bit later, and then a few more up here. It's a pretty neat tool having the magic wand, because we can do some neat selections that way. If we just want to select a person's face and it's all pretty much same contrast except the background, that's an easy way of selecting it. Selecting for removal of red eye in photos, you can just select that iris or whatever part of the eye, the pupil, certain parts that turn red. You can just go ahead and select that and change the color and do any editing you need to it. I'll go ahead and zoom back out just a little. The next tool is our crop tool, which is by itself once again. We don't have any other tools embedded into this one. But what the crop tool is if you're not really familiar with the terminology, cropping it is just sort of cutting out a selection of the image. So I'm just going to draw this out, just like you would with the elliptical tool. Just drawing it out, and then you can, of course, change these. So it's just like the marquee tool or the elliptical tool, whether it's square or not. We have the same selection, and then we can edit our edges and click enter. And once we hit enter, it's going to remove the rest of the image and just cut out what we selected. So that's how we crop an image. And then our next is slices. We have a slice tool and slice select tool. Unless you're really working with web design, slices aren't going to be that important. I'll go into more detail with slices later, but what it pretty much allows us to do is divide up images for web design. I could create a slice, or a couple of slices right here. So now we have our image broken up into 1, 2, and 3 slices. So this could load on a web page as 3 different images all together. So it's a good way to sort of break up your interface or large images that are going to be displayed on multiple pages and things like that for web design. Other than that, you're really not going to need to use slices. So I'm going to go back and just delete those slices. And we also want to turn off showing slices, because now when we first select a slice to create a slice, it's going to ask us to show them, or actually just automatically do it by default. So we're going to go to view, show, and turn off slices. So now that little number's gone up there.